Hello everyone, welcome back to my English classes after a long time. Now today I am going to give the explanation of The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh from class 11th, prose part. So I'll explain point by point. Please listen carefully and I hope that you will like the video. Please do like and subscribe my channel, Mahi English Classes. Now, the first point in the summary of the chapter is the author remembers his grandmother and grandfather. Now, the author recalls his grandmother. He recalls his grandmother because she is not anymore now, as a very old lady. For the 20 years that the author had known his grandmother, he had found her old and wrinkled. Means for 20 years the writer has been there with his grandmother and he has seen the growing age of his grandmother. It was hard for him to believe that she had once been young and pretty and had a husband. The author's grandfather's portrait hung on the wall of the drawing room. That means the portrait made by his grandfather, that picture has been placed on the wall. He wrote a big turban. His clothes were loose. He looked at least 100 years old. Looking at his portrait, one could not imagine him in his youth with his wife and children. Means here the writer is imagining the thing that when the portrait was made, his grandfather was already old. Okay. Now the second part, the author's grandmother. Now here he will describe his grandmother. The thought of grandmother being young and pretty was almost revolving to him. Revolving means moving around in his head. Imagination is going on. She was short, fat, slightly bent in structure. Means जैसे थोड़े से बुढ़े लोग होते हैं तो थोड़ा झुक के चलते हैं. In the same way she used to walk. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles. Like in our hands, in our palm, we have lines crisscrossed. In the same way, when people get old, they have wrinkles on their faces. Her silvery white hair was scattered over his wrinkled face. Means when the person gets old, his black hair becomes white. Now the next point, the author's childhood with his grandmother. Now here he will describe the time when he was there with his grandmother. The author and his grandmother were good friends. His parents left him to stay with her when they shifted to the city. In the village, his grandmother took care of all his needs. Means as the mother was the caretaker of the writer, so she used to take care of everything as the parents were not in the village, they were staying in the city. She was quite active and agile. Agile means activity. She was not dull lady. Though she was old, but her activities were much more on the move. She used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for school. She bathed and dressed him. Means for school, the grandmother used to get ready his grandchild for school. Then she would fetch his wooden slate. And in olden days, they used to have a slate where they used to write with the chalk. Okay, nowadays we are having smart classes and all, but in those days these things were not available. Okay, which he had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. She would take an earthen ink pot and a red pen and tie them in a bundle and hand it to the author. Means all the things which are needed to write on the slate, she used to pack those things with the author. After having a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it for breakfast. Means as in our young age, or you can say as in our childhood age, we like chapati with a little bit ghee and sugar in it. So in the same way, she used to give him chapati with a little bit oil in it and sugar or butter. The author's grandmother always accompanied him to the school as it was attached to the temple. Means Grandmother used to take the child to the school, and on the way there was a temple. So the grandmother used to stay there on the temple, read the scriptures in the temple, and spend time. And she used to return back home with his grandchild when the school gets over. Next point, the author at school. What was the activities? How the author was in the school. The priest taught children the alphabet and the morning prayer. The children sat in two rows in the veranda. In those days, there were no benches and all, so the students used to sit on the veranda and study. They would sing the alphabet or the prayer in choruses, not in like A B C D. They used to sing those A B C D, because in the singing form the child is able to learn it quickly and he never forgets. While the author learned his lessons at school, the grandmother would read scriptures in the adjoining temple. On their way back, they would feed stale chapatis to the dogs. Means while going back home after the school, they used to bring, my grandmother used to bring stale chapatis and she used to give to the stray dogs. Next point, the turning point in the relationship of grandmother and the author. Now there was a turning point in their life when everything changed. The relationship of both the grandmother and the author changed. The turning point came in their relationship when they moved to the city to stay with their author's parents. Now there was a time that they all shifted to the city, and the city life is totally different from the village life. In the city, the author went to an English school in a motor bus. Now in the city, he was not allowed to go with his grandmother. She used to go with the bus. The grandmother could not accompany him to the school as there were no dogs in the streets. The grandmother took to feeding the sparrows. Now the time changed that the grandmother was not able to take the child to the school because he used to go with the motor bus. Now there were no street dogs. Now here in the city there were sparrows and she used to feed those sparrows. As the years rolled by, they saw less of each other. Means in the city life they became busy. Now the grandmother was not able to spend that much time that she used to spend in the village. And they don't have much time to talk together. So very less time they used to come in contact with each other. In spite of her immense interest in his studies, she could not help him in his lessons as he was learning English, because in the olden days the old people didn't knew about English. So she was unable to teach him. But in the village she used to teach him, because in the village the language was easy. The law of gravity, principles, and many much more things which she could not understand, and this made her unhappy. But she is feeling unhappy. Why? Because he is not in communication with the grandchild as she was there in the village. So she was not happy with it. The city life for the grandmother was not a happy one. Sometimes she would ask him what the teacher had taught him. Next point, grandmother distressed and disturbed. As she moved in the city, the life totally changed, so it was not according to grandmother. So the changes in the city made her distressed and disturbed. Grandmother didn't believe in the things taught at the English school, and she was distressed to learn that there were no teachings about God and scriptures in the school. As our grandparents also teach us about the holy scriptures, so there in the city this thing was not available in the schools. In the village it was there. So she was disliking these things. Moreover, she was very disturbed at the idea of music lessons being given to English school. Nowadays we are having music classes in schools, but in olden days it was considered that learning music is not good for the normal people, the normal people going to school. But nowadays it is common thing that in each school we are having music classes. To her, music had associations, and she considered music to be unsuitable for gentle people. Okay, now it was in those days it was believed that music is not a good thing. Next point, the common link of friendship gets snapped, means distracted, moved away. The common link of friendship between the author and the grandmother broke when the author started going to the university and was given a room to of his own. Means here there was separate rooms for grandmother and the grandson. So now here again the communication gap was there between them. The grandmother accepted her loneliness and rarely spoke to anyone. In olden days, we used to see that the old people don't talk much. They only sit, sleep and eat. है ना? So in the same way, as she was feeling lonely, so she doesn't talk to anyone. All day long, she sat spinning the wheel and reciting her prayers. Spinning means like mala is there and they used to do count and do prayers. So the same way the grandmother used to do. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. Now there is a change in the communication. There is a change in the living style of grandmother and the author. And now here, in place of feeding the dogs, she is feeding the sparrows. Now sparrows have become friends of grandmother. They perched on her shoulders and some even on her head, but she never shooed them away. She never moved them away. It used to be the happiest half an hour of the day for her. Now in the city, half an hour spending with the sparrows was the happiest time for the grandmother. Next point, the author leaves for higher studies. Now here again the author has been shifted from the cities to the other place for his further studies. The author decided to go abroad for higher studies for 5 years. Now from the village to the city, and now for the higher studies from city to the abroad. He was sure that his grandmother would be upset at his departure. But she was not even sentimental. She came to the railway station to see him off. She showed no emotions, means she controlled her emotions so that the grandchild would be able to go for his further studies. You cannot stop anyone from moving further. She was absorbed in praying and counting the beads of her rosary. Silently, she kissed his forehead. The author thought that perhaps it was the last sign of physical contact between them, because as it is natural thing that old people and any time we can leave this world, but the imagination of the author is thing, and he was also sad that he is leaving his grandmother for 5 years, and he was thinking that maybe this is the last time he is physically seeing his grandmother, so he was little bit distressed. Next point, the grandmother celebrates the author's return and falls sick. After 5 years, the author found his grandmother at the station when he returned. Now he was happy and she was also happy to see both in front of each other. She held him in her arms. He found her more religious and more self-contained. He could hear her reciting prayers. Even that day, the happiest moment for her was feeding the sparrows herself. Now here there has been a gap between the author and the grandmother. Now there is a connection of the sparrows with the grandmother. Now she used to spend her time with the sparrows. However, something strange happened to her in the evening. Something has happened in the evening. For the first time ever, she did not pray. Means the person who does a particular thing every day, when that person doesn't do the same thing any day, we are surprised to see it. The same thing happened that day in the evening, grandmother was not reciting her prayers. So everybody was estranged. Instead, she collected the women of her neighborhood, got an old drum and started singing songs of the homecoming of warriors. They tried to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining herself, but she didn't listen. She fell ill the next morning. Means now the condition is becoming worse and worse. Now here the grandmother is ill now. Okay, and maybe this is the ending time of grandmother, that she is not saying anything, she is not reciting poems, and she is not reciting her prayers also, and she is not doing any activities. Next point, grandmother's death. The grandmother was diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, but she insisted that her end was near, as an age was there. So the doctor said this, now this is the end time of his grandmother. She told everyone that she did not want to talk to anyone and would rather spend her last moments praying. Old people used to do this thing. She ignored everyone's protest and started counting the beads in her rosary while praying. After a short while, the author noticed that the grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Means when there is life, we have a control on our hands to hold something. But if there is no life, then everything slips. The same thing happened with the grandmother, that the movement of her lips was no more. She died a peaceful death. She was covered with a red shawl. Next point, the sparrows mourn her death. Now here, not only human beings were sad, even the animals can understand the situations. If suppose you have a pet dog and something happens at home, negativity, then the signs can be seen through the dogs. In the same way, animals also have feelings to understand the situation. In the same way here, when grandmother died, the sparrows also mourned to her death. When the author and others came to take away grandmother's body, they met a strange sight. What strange sight the people watched there? They watched that lot of sparrows had surrounded her body. When the body was kept in the house, there was many sparrows who came in. They were all silent. Now every day when they used to come, they used to crib for food. But that very same day when grandmother was no more, they found that the sparrows were not making any sound. They were quietly there where the body of grandmother was lying. They were all silent. When the author's mother offered the sparrows some bread, they refused to eat and quietly flew away after the grandmother's body was carried away for the last rites. Now here you can see the strange thing happened, that every day when the sparrows used to come, grandmother used to feed them and they used to eat and go away. But the day when grandmother was dead, the sparrows were silent. They didn't even eat a single piece of bread. They quietly sat there for a while till the body of her grandmother was not shifted, was not carried away for the last rites. Till that time, the sparrows were silent. They have not eaten anything. They have not drunk water even, as every day they used to do it when grandmother was alive. So we can see that the emotions of the animals are there with the human beings. Okay, we cannot imagine these things. We think that these are animals, they don't care for us, but they do. So I hope you have understood the chapter, and please do like and subscribe my channel, my English classes. Thank you for your cooperation.